As night falls, mysterious shadows begin to sneak into familiar spaces. In the silence of the room, fear stood like a shadow, waiting for the moment to rise. Stories about spiders, small creatures with terrifying power, will lead you on a haunting journey. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to read are not just stories, but living nightmares where fear and reality blend together. Story 5: Nightmare from Above. A few years ago, I spent a long weekend sitting in front of my computer screen, drowning myself in cups of coffee and energy drinks, barely sleeping. In the midst of my exhaustion, I began to feel a strange itch on my arm, like there was a strand of hair hanging down that I couldn't brush away. This feeling became more haunting as it repeated, making me wonder if I was sinking into hallucinations caused by insomnia. Then I stopped, stared at my arm, and noticed what looked like tiny spiders crawling across my skin. I gasped, wondering if I had lost my mind or was haunted by a panic attack. But when I raised my head, in the dim light of the screen, I saw thin strands of spider silk sparkling like morning dew, floating in the air. Tiny spiders were actually falling from the ceiling, through a hole I had never noticed. My heart pounded. I quickly grabbed the insect spray and pressed hard on the nozzle. The hole in the ceiling seemed to erupt a rain of spiders, hundreds, then thousands of tiny spiders began to pour out, collapsing down on me, wrapping around my body in thin threads of silk. They crawled all over my skin, turning into a vivid nightmare that made me tremble in horrified panic. Story 4: Spider Trap on the Way Home. I came home late after a long, tiring day of work. The road ahead was dark, with only a few flickering lights from the surrounding houses. I was engrossed in thinking about trivial things until I walked straight into something thick and greasy that wrapped around me. A giant spider web blocked the path. At first, I didn't think much about it, just shivered slightly at the discomfort when the delicate silk thread stuck to my skin and clothes. But when I looked down, my heart stopped beating. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of small spiders were crawling all over my body. They spread on his shirt, hands, and all over his toes. I stood rooted to the spot, feeling like I couldn't breathe. I thought about hastily brushing them away, but another scene terrified me much more. Right in front of my house, where I often step in every day, are two giant spiders, their bodies rougher and swollen. They are almost as big as an adult's hand, with black eyes that glow in the dark. I could feel their cold eyes staring at me, as if warning me not to get too close. Terror overwhelmed me. I couldn't use the front door. I started running towards the back of the house, with only one thought in mind: escape from this group of spiders. With every step I took, I felt more and more clearly the small spiders falling, crawling all over my body, wriggling into my hair and collar. When I reached the back door, I almost tore my clothes off, rushed into the bathroom, and turned on the water with trembling hands. Under the torrential water, I looked in the mirror and witnessed the horrifying scene as each small spider slowly fell from my hair, drifted with the water, and disappeared into the drain. Every second that passed seemed to last forever, the fear still haunting me, making me unable to shake off the feeling of disgust. I wondered if this night would ever pass without any more nightmares, but deep inside, I knew that the images of those spiders would never fade. Story 3: Scary Spiders. Late at night, after a long and tiring day, I returned home exhausted. My phone had only one battery left, and as usual, I plugged it into the socket under the bed. Without turning on the light, I collapsed on the bed and reached under, hoping to find the charger. But instead of feeling the familiar cable, my fingers touched something soft and warm, like a sack. Surprised, I started squeezing and prodding the strange bag, trying to determine what it was. Just when I thought I knew, I suddenly felt hundreds of small, cold feet poking into my skin. It felt like a nightmare come to life as those tiny creatures began to crawl up my arms. They moved quickly and thickly, like a cruel stream creeping across my skin, bringing with it a cold shiver. Panicking, I yanked my hand out from under the bed and screamed in despair. In the dim light from the window, I saw my arm, now covered with about 30 baby spiders, their skinny legs stinging me like small blades. I shook my arms hard, trying to get rid of them, but they clung tightly, as if they wanted to bite deep into my skin. I rushed out of the room, screaming for help. My parents ran over in panic, and I frantically jumped into the bathroom, turned on the shower all the way, hot water pouring down my body. I tried to wash off the scary spiders, but it felt like they were still crawling on me, each little leg still dancing in my mind. After making sure there were no more spiders on me, I returned to the room, shaking and scared. My parents carefully checked under the bed, and what they found terrified the whole family. A bag of baby spiders, hundreds of tiny spiders crawling in the dark, along with a huge, terrifying mother spider. It sat there quiet and still, as if waiting for the moment to strike. The room where I once felt safest was now a living nightmare, and in the nights that followed, every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel those little legs touching my skin, pulling me back to that terrifying moment under the bed. Story 2: Strange Appearance. As night fell and the house fell silent, I gradually fell into a deep sleep, a state where all sounds and images seemed to drift in a dreamland. But in the middle of the night, around 2:40, I woke up with a start. A strange feeling invaded my mind. Something, a large living object, was moving right above my bed. Still half asleep and gripped by sleep, I felt it crawl around me, gently but unmistakably. An uncontrollable panic hit me, making me jump out of bed, thinking only of a giant spider or some other scary creature lurking. I quickly threw the blanket off the bed, my heart pounding, my mind confused. But before my eyes was nothing but emptiness, nothing there. Everything seemed normal, suspiciously quiet. I stood there, telling myself that I had just experienced a terrible nightmare, that feeling was just the remnants of a dream that was slowly disappearing. After a few minutes to stabilize my heart rate, I decided to lie back in bed, trying to regain the sleep that had been stolen. However, the next night, the same situation happened again. This time, around 3:13 a.m., I was startled awake again when I felt something crawling on my arm. It felt like a creature with tremendous strength and agility was moving through my skin. Once again, I jumped out of bed in a state of panic, my mind still wandering between dream and reality. Unable to bear the feeling of being surrounded by this invisible fear, I immediately ran to my parents' room, my heart pounding in my chest. My father, who was never afraid of spiders or any other creature, stood up immediately. He entered my room with his usual composure, throwing away the blankets and sheets, looking for any trace of whatever had frightened me. But again, there's nothing there. The room fell into an eerie silence again, with only my bewildered eyes and the confusion on my father's face. What happened kept making me suspect that something was wrong, that my dreams were becoming too real, or that something mysterious was surrounding me. The feeling of insecurity gradually prevailed, pushing me into a state of stress and fear every time night fell. The third night came again, and this time, fear was no longer just a vague feeling. I woke up startled again, clearly feeling something crawling on my arm. That feeling was undeniable, too real to be just a dream. In a half-awake state, I screamed and jumped out of bed. The blanket was thrown high. But this time, when the blanket fell off, I was greeted by the most horrifying sight I had ever seen: a giant spider, larger than the tarantulas I had ever heard of, crawling down from my bed. My eyes widened in surprise. My heart stopped beating for a moment as the spider disappeared under the bed, as fast as a ghost. I couldn't control myself, screamed in panic, and ran back to my parents' room again, my arms and legs shaking as I told my dad about the scary creature I had just seen. The following nights, I no longer dared to close my eyes without the light on, and the obsession of that giant spider continued to surround me, making me always wonder if it was just a dream or if there really was a monster. Something scary is waiting in the dark. Story 1: Terrifying Memories. The Giant Spider. When I was staying with my grandmother on the weekend, the feeling of fatigue left me with no energy to do anything other than fall into a state of exhaustion. My uncle, who still lives with my grandmother, often calls me to work with him, and earning a little salary is something I always appreciate. But after a long day of work, I just want to find a place to rest, and the bed upstairs seems to be what I need right now. I crawled into bed, feeling tired and sore. Turning on the TV for a bit, I only watched about 10 minutes before deciding it was time to go to bed. That night, it was so hot that it made me feel uncomfortable, as if all the heat was concentrated on the bed. On nights like these, I often have to turn my pillow over to look for cool patches, hoping to relieve the heat. As I followed my routine, I gently laid my head down on the pillow and pressed my cheek against the cool part of the pillow I had just flipped. But in just a moment, a strange and indescribable feeling made me jump up. Something furry, full of disgust, was pressed against my face. My whole body felt like it was being electrocuted. I jumped up, my eyes were wide open, and my heart was beating violently. In the dim light of my bedroom, I saw a giant adult huntsman spider sitting on my pillow. The spider, with its enormous size and long legs like sharp blades, sat right on the pillow where I had just laid my head. The overwhelming fear caused me to fall to the opposite side of the bed, causing my pillow and blanket to fall. My movement seemed to panic the spider, and with a speed I almost couldn't believe, it flew off the pillow and disappeared into the darkness. As I tried to catch my breath and calm my heartbeat, the horrifying images of the spider were still haunting my mind. I couldn't help but think that, even though the spider had left, it might still be lurking somewhere in my grandmother's house, waiting to cause more terror. That haunting feeling kept clinging to me, making it impossible for me to sleep peacefully, even though I knew that the night was gradually passing in a hot and anxious atmosphere. When the dawn light began to appear, the nightmares gradually disappeared, but the fear was still there, imprinted in my mind. These stories are not just terrifying dreams, they are reminders of the things that lurk in the Bexar, the fears that we often face. Remember, in this world, not everything is as it seems, and maybe one day you will find yourself facing spiders not only in your dreams, but also in reality. Be careful, because fears can sometimes come true.